On today's episode of Locked On Wild, three of the biggest oddities so far for this Minnesota Wild season. Will they turn around down the stretch?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, we are your team each and every day. And we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we're going to look at three of the biggest random perks of this Minnesota Wild season. Three things that are just a big head scratcher in what has been a very, very eventful Minnesota Wild season so far. We'll talk about the home road splits, special teams, and that second line, which continues to be an absolute mystery for the Wild. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild. And it's been an interesting season, to say the least, for the Minnesota Wild. They find themselves currently in the 3 spot in the Central Division, which you'll absolutely love to see. But it has been just a real bizarro world season for the Wild, and I mean that in the nicest way possible. You're talking about a Wild team that is like the best in the NHL on the road. Can't necessarily win at home. And so let's just start right there by looking at some of the splits for the Minnesota Wild so far this year. So let's start at home, because home is the one that you should have the better record at, right? Like, you should be pretty good at defending your home ice. And if you look at the contenders so far let's start with the Western Conference. If you look at the teams that are in playoff contention in the West, the only other team that has even remotely close to as bad of a home record as the Minnesota Wild is the Vancouver Canucks, who are currently 11, 10, and 7 at home. That's hideous. But beyond that, like, just go up and down the list. Winnipeg, 22, 5, and 3. Dallas, 27 and 1. Edmonton, 18, 10, and 2. Vegas, 19, 6, and 3. Los Angeles is 17, 3, and 2 at home. Colorado is 16, 10, and 2. Even Calgary, who is 3 points behind the Vancouver Canucks, they're 16, 10, and 4 at home. All these teams have winning records at home. The Minnesota Wild are 13, 12, and 1. And what do the everydayers know about a 13, 12, and 1 record? 13 and 13. So it has been just a real thorn in the side. And XL Energy Center has always been an environment in which the Wilds, even in seasons that they're not doing well, they put up good records at home up until this season. And so I went and I looked at the splits for the Wild to try to figure out, why is this happening? Well, if you look at their overall record, they have scored 70 goals at home. They've given up 83. So they are getting pretty roundly outscored in home games so far this season, which is not great. And if you stretch it out, it's 2.69 goals for per game and 3.19 goals against per game, which the 2.69 offensively, that's not great. 3.19 isn't terrible, but there is definitely room to improve in that regard. Goal splits. The Minnesota Wild are -4 in the first period. They've been outscored 25-21. They're -7 in the second period. They've been outscored 28-21. They've been outscored in the third period 30-25. They have outscored their opponents 3-0 in overtime, but it's still a minus 13 overall goal differential at home. And look at the numbers for this team compared to what they do overall. The Minnesota Wild, when they score first, they are 24-8-2, but just 9-6-1 at home when they score first. When they outshoot their opponents, 14-4-2. They're 4-2-1 at home. When they're outshot by their opponents, 18-15-2. So above 500 when they are outshot by their opponents, but they're 8-10 in those games at home. They are 7-4 in 1-goal games at home, which is a good mark. But just so much of the success has come on the road for this Minnesota Wild team this year. And the only thing that I can think of, and this is a notion that I have brought up on this show before, so the everydayers have heard this mentioned, is that the style that the Wild play, for whatever reason this year, is just so much more conducive to winning on the road. Because you think about what makes the Wild tick. They're trying to limit chances and opportunities for their opponent. And if you do that at home, if you're focused more on that than you are scoring goals at home, the fans get restless because they're looking to see goals. And it's way easier to go into a road environment and quiet the opposing fans, because the opposing fans want to see their team score a goal. And if you prevent that team from scoring, the fans, they get restless. They're sitting on their hands. They get quiet. And I think that has a little something to do with why they have been so much better on the road. I mean, as far as road wins go for the Wild, 27-3 is hands down the best road record in not only the Western Conference, but you look at the Eastern Conference as well. The only other team that's close is the Washington Capitals, as far as those road records go. So the Wild have been one of the best teams in the league on the road, but I think it stems from them being able to limit their opponent and feed off of the lack of energy in the building, and by playing spoiler, something that they have done quite a bit. I mean, listen to the road numbers. The Wilds have outscored their opponents 91-74 on the road. They are plus 10 in the first period, 27-17 in the goals department. They're plus 4 in the second. They're plus 4 in the third. They have been outscored by 1 in overtime, but plus 10 in the first period. And then you couple that with the fact that on the road, the Wild are 15-2-1 when they score first. When they are outshot by their opponents on the road, they're still 10-5-2. When they outshoot their opponents on the road, they're 10-2-1. When they lead after one on the road, they're 14-1. This is a team that is predicated on limiting chances, stopping opportunities, and I think that just plays way better on the road than it does at home. Now, this is where this gets interesting, because if you look at the Minnesota Wild schedule here throughout the rest of the season, they have played 26 games at home and 30 on the road. And if you want the splits for the road, as far as goals go, 3.03 goals for per game on the road, 2.47 goals against on the road. So a much better split. Power plays at 17.7%, penalty kill at 77.1%. At home, power play is 20.3%, and the penalty kills at 63.8%. Again, I don't get it. I don't understand it. But this team clearly plays night and day better on the road than they do at home. But as we were talking about, so they've played 30 of their 41 road games already, which means that they've got 11 road games left. And that means then that they have 15 home games. And they've got some lengthy home stretches coming up. The middle of March, they have a homestand from March 9th through March 22nd, which will allow them then to be on the road for the high school boys hockey tournament. They're going to need to find a way to pick up some wins at home here down the stretch against some very tough teams. And I don't know if it is just as simple as playing with the white jerseys at home, whatever the case may be. But you're going to need to pick up some big home wins down the stretch here, and you can't just get turtled at home just because you're not playing on the road. So that's one of the biggest oddities I think of this season is that the home and road splits have been so polar opposite. So that's something that the Wild are going to need to get fixed here down the stretch. But we have a couple of other just big question marks, big oddities so far from the first portion of the season. We're going to talk about the special teams because the special teams numbers continue to be not great, but are they trending in the right direction? We'll discuss as we continue today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked on Wild is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Are you looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they are packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. And as much as everybody likes to just grab a bowl of pistachios and sit on the couch and crack them open, let's be honest, that is kind of a fun part of eating pistachios. There is a no shells variety. So you can get the already shelled pistachios. You throw those in a bowl, pop on your favorite show on TV, and the next thing you know, you've gone through an entire bag. Hey, no harm, no foul. It happens to the best of us, especially elite snackers like myself. So get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Again, that's wonderfulpistachios.com, wonderfulpistachios.com. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked on Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. We are your team each and every day as well. And if you have not already, make sure you subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. So we're talking about oddities today. Just weird kind of splits that have plagued the Minnesota Wild so far this season. We talked about the home and the road splits. Well, how about the special teams? The special teams for the Minnesota Wild have not been great for pretty much the entirety of the season. If we go with the full scope of the year, the Minnesota Wild currently sit 24th in the league on the power play at 18.9%. As far as the penalty kill goes, the Wild are 29th in the league at 71.6. But is it getting better? Are the Wild doing a better job of killing penalties since we flipped the calendar to 2025? Well, if you look at from October through December 31st, the Minnesota Wild were 30th at 70.3% on the penalty kill. The power play was at 19% at the end of the year. And what does it look like from January 1st to where we currently sit? at February 19th? Well, pretty similar. But the Minnesota Wild, at least in 2025, are at a 74% penalty kill. Their power play is at 18.6%. So the penalty kill is kind of going in the right direction. The power play, not so much. And what if we go strictly to the month of February? The Minnesota Wild in the month of February, their penalty kill was at 80% in 4 games. Their power play is at 8.3%. Let's start with the power play. There's an expectation that when you subtract Kirill Kaprizov from the lineup, that the power play is just not going to be on the same wavelength. Understandable. And I may even throw you a bone there and say, well, it's pretty clear that not having Kirill Kaprizov on the power play is making a big impact. But even when he was on the power play, it still was not great. And it's one thing if you're able to possess the puck for the entirety of a 2-minute power play, you get some chances on net and you just can't score. We've seen a few of those from the Minnesota Wild this year where they do everything but score. We've also seen plenty where they cannot even get into the zone. And those are the ones that I think are more frustrating is hey, we spent 2 minutes basically defending like we were on the penalty kill and we couldn't break the offensive zone. Those are the ones that get frustrating, and those are the ones that leave you feeling like this is something that we're just not going to fix at any point. But the Wild have plenty of talent for that top power play. Beyond that, it gets a little sketchy. But in order to figure something out and to get that unit operating a little more successfully, somebody's got to take the lead. Somebody has to take the lead on that top unit with Kirill Kaprizov out of the picture. And you would hope that it would be Matt Boldy. But it doesn't necessarily need to be Matt Boldy. Matt Zuccarello could, for all I care. It doesn't matter who it is on that unit. Somebody just needs to step up and direct traffic and take the lead and just start making some plays. I think by and large, there has been at least an attempt to move the players around a little bit. You think about what this Minnesota Wild power play tries to do, and they like to set up for a couple of things. They like to set up for the right face-off circle one-timer from either Boldy or Kaprizov. That's one of the cards in the deck. The other card in the deck, though, is that between the face-off circles, like tic-tac-toe shot. I haven't seen that work as much. Obviously, the Wild had a little bit of success with the one-timers from the face-off circle, but I haven't seen as much success with that between the circles, tic-tac-toe, bing, bang, boom, just blast from there. But I think I understand the logic behind it. I think what you're trying to do is to get a quick rebound, get the goalie off balance, and then get them out of position to where somebody grabs the rebound and can tap it in. Just tap it in. Give it a little tap, tap, taparoo. But again, power plays and penalty kills are judged on results. It's the same thing with the penalty kill. You can kill 1 minute, 50 seconds. If you give up a goal in that final 10, still considered a non-successful penalty kill. But let's be honest. I think the bigger issue is just the fact that you can win a face-off, immediately shoot, and score on this Wild penalty kill. How many times have we seen the Wild give up a goal in the first 7 seconds of a power play? 20 seconds. They don't even get an opportunity to get set and get established before the other team has just said, oh, nope, we're just going to score. And then you don't have to worry about it. So the special teams have been a multi-year curse, to be perfectly honest. And you look at all the different things. Are we talking about a possession here? Are we talking about like a building got built on sacred ground that shouldn't have been? Something is up with the penalty kill, especially because the penalty kill has been bad for probably 4 years. There have been stretches where it's been pretty good, but it's mostly been a mess. So I don't know what I need to do in order to get that situated, but you can darn well bet that we're going to try to get it figured out here by the end of the season. We'll finish with the obvious one. There is one other oddity that we have not discussed for this Minnesota Wild season so far. I'll give you a hint. It has to do with scoring. So we'll count to 6 as we finish today's episode of Locked on Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. And once again, we thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. We are your team each and every day. And we're going to finish with a look at the top 6, because the top 6 has been a full-fledged conundrum for the Minnesota Wild so far this season. And if you look at the players that you expect to score, it's honestly at this point it's down to 4, and one of them is not in the lineup. So your expected scorers right now, the players that you expect to do most of the lifting offensively, are Matt Boldy, Rossi, and Matt Zuccarello. Beyond that, there really has not been anybody that has stepped into even a semi-consistent scoring role. Freddie Gaudreau, who has basically exceeded his point output from last season already. But if you look at what Freddie has done here over the last several games, he went on a stretch in which he scored 3 goals in a 4-game span. Between January 25th to the 30th, he did score against the Islanders as well. So maybe he's starting to pick it up a little bit, but he had not scored a goal before scoring against the Calgary Flames on the 25th. He had not scored a goal since December 29th. So there was a lengthy drought in there for Freddie Gaudreau, but it hopefully appears as though he is starting to kind of get himself back on track. What about Joel Eriksson Ek? Eriksson Ek scored in 2 consecutive games. He scored in that Flames game on the 25th. He scored against Chicago on the 26th, but has not scored a goal in 5 straight games for the Wild. And he went 7 straight games without a goal before the game against the Flames on the 25th. So he has not been consistent this year. It's pretty evident that some of the injury things are robbing him of his offense this year, but he has not been a consistent scorer on this team. And guys like Marcus Foligno, he's got 10 goals in 56 games. He's not being relied upon to be a primary scorer. And you've had players like, for instance, Ryan Hartman take a step back to where he's got 7 goals in 48 games. Beyond that, you really have not gotten a ton of production from the bottom 6. Marcus Johansson has 5 goals in 47 games. So you are relying heavily. That's not a new problem. You're relying heavily on like 3 or 4 guys to do the lifting. And if you can get a couple of players to just add even a dynamic to that offense, well, then you're going to be able to find ways to win games by a score of 4-3 or 3-2, as opposed to losing games 1 or 2-0 pretty much every time you play. So it has been an oddity because we, like, for a while, especially early on, those first 25 games, it was like pick your poison. Like, we've got guys that can score at will from pretty much everywhere in the lineup. And now it has gone cold, but as I alluded to, some of that you expect with your Hart Trophy candidate not in the lineup. That's a tough pill to swallow, but it is one that is going to have to be it's going to have to be addressed, because you can't have multiple spots, especially in the top. You can't have multiple spots that are just being empty, calorie filled. So it's not the biggest oddity of the season. The home road splits is by far the biggest oddity for the Minnesota Wild so far this season. I've never seen anything like this in the time that I've been covering hockey. It defies most of the logic that that I have in my head. So the offense, I would say, is probably third on that list. No, I'll say second. I'll say home road splits is first. Offense is second. Special teams is third on that list. I do want to finish with something that was brought up in the live show, and we thank those that were able to join us earlier tonight. Had a great show with Denny, and something that was brought up was the status of Danila Yurov, who has been injured and now is going to have surgery to repair. It sounds like it's a minor surgery. There really isn't a ton of concern about Yurov missing the playoffs for the KHL this season. But it is something, as injuries have gone with this Minnesota Wild team, there is certainly reason to be, I guess, a little hesitant to say, well, if we're not concerned about it, then why even mention it? Because just look at what has happened with the injuries so far for this Minnesota Wild team. There have been 80 kajillion of them so far this year. So I will hope that it is a major or a minor thing for Danila Yurov, but I guess we'll wait and see, depending on how the KHL season goes for his squad. But we will, of course, keep an eye on it, because that's what we do here at Locked On Wild. Is we just keep an eye on everything for you, so that you can enjoy the games, and then you can pop back in here after the fact to hear how things went. So that is going to wrap it up here for today's episode. Again, if we're ranking the oddities this year, the home and road splits is number 1. The scoring, the secondary scoring, is number 2. And the special teams, continuing to be mostly a mess. That is by far number 3 on the list. So that's what we got for you for today's show. Again, appreciate everybody tuning in as you do each and every day of the week. Make sure to hit the like button on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe, and make sure to follow us on your favorite podcast platforms as well, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Coming up on tomorrow's show, we'll be talking to Scotty Bentley of Locked On Red Wings. A real fun conversation with him, talking about the Detroit Red Wings. We'll talk about former Wild goalie Cam Talbot with a nice little resurgence for Detroit. We'll talk about the Wild killer, Patrick Kane. And we'll talk about the Red Wings and their coaching change that they made this year. Their season feels awfully familiar. A lot of what the Wild dealt with last year, the Red Wings are currently dealing with this season. So you can tune in for that coming up for you tomorrow. And, of course, we got the Four Nations face-off, the final game between U.S. and Canada. So that's coming up tomorrow. And then the season resumes on Saturday. So thank you for tuning in here tonight. And you can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.